It gives us great pleasure to have Stephanie Dinkins joining us today, who is an artist fellow at the Berggruen Institute. Stephanie Dinkins is a transmedia artist who creates platforms for dialogue about artificial intelligence as it intersects race, gender, aging, and our future histories. She's particularly driven to work with communities of color to co-create more inclusive, fair, and ethical artificial intelligence ecosystems. Dinkins' art practice employs lens-based practices, emerging technologies, and community engagement to confront questions of bias in AI, consciousness, data sovereignty, and social equity. Investigations into the contradictory histories, traditions, knowledge bases, and philosophies that inform societies at large and underpin her thought and art production. She earned an MFA at the Maryland Institute of College of Art 97 and is an alumna of the Whitney Independent Studies Program and publicly advocates for inclusive AI internationally at a broad spectrum of community, private, and institutional venues by design. Stephanie Dinkins is a Creative Capital grantee, as well as a 2018-19 Soros Equality Fellow, Data and Society Research Institute Fellow, and a 2018 Sundance New Frontiers Story Lab Fellow. And we're incredibly honored to have her here today to talk to us about community craft and the vernacular in artificial intelligence. And alongside Stephanie, we will also have Manuel Sabin as a discussant for our talk today. And Manuel Sabin is a postdoctoral researcher at the Radboud Institute University, who's working with lawyers and legal philosophers on the Conhubicol project. This project is on accounting as a human being in the era of computational law. And their work there aims to understand and give languages new technologies. For example, machine learning-based recidivism prediction, smart contracts, geometrics, etc. Before this, Manuel received their PhD at UC Berkeley. In fact, Manuel has just submitted their thesis on Friday, so it's a momentous occasion. As a theoretical computer scientist, lots of clapping, advised by Shafi Goldwasser and Christos Papadimitriou. Their work continues to vary from foundational complexity theory and cryptography to analyzing the implicit politics encoded into technology and its socio-technical effects and redistributing power in the world. Manuel is an organizer of the Radical AI Network and founded and organized the Queer Trans People of Color Conference for Reclaiming Education and STEM conferences, which of great importance. So thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Stephanie. And we're excited to hear from you today.
It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk to you all. And what I'm really going to do is tell you a little bit about my practice, and particularly one project called Not the Only One. And through that project, we'll think through a few ideas that have really been bubbling up in me through the practice. I will start also by saying that, disclaimer in a way, I'm an artist, really a photographer, who happened into this space. And I do really mean happened into this space. Just by happenstance, I came across Bina 48, a social engaged robot online, and that was it for me. And I started investigating different things. And so since 2014, I've been delving into what artificial intelligence means for communities of color, because I got a little bit frightened thinking about what it means, who's programming different systems that we rely on and how that will impact us. And then, what the heck do we do about it, if anything? And then how do we make in this space, which is how I get to the idea of craft. So let me pull up my presentation and share my screen, because showing is always better than babbling at you. And we'll roll from there. As I said, I'm talking about Not the Only One. And I guess I should say I'm the Kusama Professor of Art at Stony Brook University these days. This is a picture of Not the Only One as it stands now. Not the Only One is truly a very odd cast glass sculpture that holds electronics, including voice. So it's voice interactive. People can talk to it. So people walk up to this thing and try to talk to it. And what it tries to do in turn is tell the story of my family as it knows, through 3 generations of women in my family. So really what I'm saying is that me, my aunt, and my niece did oral history together. We use that as the data to feed a deep learning algorithm and put it in the world to see what happens. At first, I thought this thing would do something very particular and that it would tell our story or give little snippets of our story to people in a linear fashion. Over time, and I've been working on this since 2018, I've come to see that really I seem to be growing a fourth generation or a continuation of the lineage of these people who are telling the oral histories. And it gives answers from the perspective of what I think of as like this weird 2-year-old entity that knows how we think from the data we fed it, actually tends to infuse a little bit of our ethos. Like, this is the thing I'm most excited about. There's something about the ethos of the family that tends to come out, although in really wonky ways, and holds some of the ideas that we hold dear. And through this, I am asking, like, how do algorithmic systems know what they know, right? And that's become a really important question for me. And I will say that this algorithmic system, me, I know it, what I know from my grandmother who, right, came north from Georgia in the 30s, landed in Tottenville, Staten Island. It's the southernmost tip of Staten Island. We became one of few Black families in a very working class white neighborhood, and she had to find a way to make a way and space for her family. And really what it was for her mostly was this garden that you're seeing a snippet of, this garden, hard work, and circling our wagons. And this is really what I want, Not the Only One, to kind of start to propagate, this idea of hard work, of honoring the things that really sustain you, and then of passing that on. So that's how I know what I know, and that's actually what I'm trying to capture in Not the Only One, for future generations that get further and further away from this way of thinking and this value set that she brought with her from the South and imbued in her family. And so these are the 3 women that informed the piece: me, myself, my aunt who is in her 80s, and my niece who is in her 20s. Altogether, we've got about 100 years of shared knowledge, right? Great Migration, all the way through 9/11 and beyond, right? And now what, COVID world and all this jazz that we're dealing with. And really, we are simply talking to each other and allow other people to talk to this thing. And so this is an alternative version of Not the Only One in gold sparkle, PLA, 3D printed. Very interestingly, people love this thing. I'm constantly excited by how people give grace to this machine and converse with it and teach it, because it is learning as it's in public spaces as well. So people add to the data that we've given it, their ideas with the questions they ask and the interactions they have with the piece. So I'm gonna play you a little snippet of me talking to this piece, just so you can get a little texture of what I'm actually talking about. Hopefully it's gonna work. So this is me in my studio talking to Not the Only One in a kind of studio coding interaction. Why do you exist?
The way.
The way to what?
I'm gonna be a little bit of a lot of things.
Good for you. Why do you exist?
I am about broad engagement and attracting people to the AI space who might not be there otherwise. I am trying to model different ways of creating AI. I encourage people who think that they are not a part of the technological future to get involved.
So that last answer you heard was one, like, we've given this thing a few canned answers because people have come to expect it. You know, in a way, Not the Only One competes with things like Siri and Alexa. And I've heard people say, well, you're not as good as Alexa, which is kind of antithetical to the point, right? Like, we're trying to make this thing that is much more open and fluid, much more direct to our family, and that is not being programmed to give very particular answers in any particular way, and has at whatever you ask. As I've said, oral history is what's getting at that. And so we're thinking about oral history as really particular data set. So a particular data set. We're thinking about memory and inclusion as acts of cultural preservation and social resistance, like holding on to what we are and passing that on as active social resistance. And we're thinking about artificial intelligence as a persistent living archive, not only for our family, but then I always think that the stories like of families like mine don't get told that often. There are often other stories that sit on top of it. And so I'm very interested in preserving what it means to be not a family who was out marching all the time, but a working family who put their head down and has been able to do wonders over time, but would not be cast as the hero in any movie in many ways. And so we're thinking a lot about small data. And when I say small data, I'm talking about, we've fed this thing so far only about 10,000 lines of information. It's not enough information, or it's hypotheses not to be enough information for this to do a good job. And we're thinking about how communities can then, like, if you only have that much data, how can you use that within a community to make something that is viable and competitive with any other system? Is it possible? How do we get to the point where we're gathering the data, where we're administering the data, and that data can really be responsive and commingle with any other system? And how can these systems be host and living repositories for the memories, myths, histories, values, and dreams of specific communities? And really these days, I'm also thinking of it in terms of how do those values that we're kind of saving and putting into these systems, these small data-based systems, inform governance, right? So I'm thinking a lot about radical governance and the common good. And so we've done some experiments recently, and it's been interesting. I was a resident at Stanford, and pushing them this idea of small data, and often I get a little chuckle when I say small data, but having people come to the conclusion and do testing to say, oh, well, there's surprisingly a lot that we can do with this. And then what I want to know is, what does that imply for greater systems, and how do we kind of encourage smaller systems that I see eventually kind of doing a Venn diagram of connection to grow into something much larger that informs the whole. Sorry, this image is just one I love because I love the way that people relate and gaze at not the only one in conversation with it. So, Norbert Wiener was talking about machines, and then Amiri Baraki took this up. So I'm going to read this little bit to you. Machines, as Norbert Wiener said, are an extension of their inventor creators. That is not simple once you think. Machines, the entire technology of the West, is just that, the technology of the West. Nothing has to look or function the way it does. The Westman's freedom, unscientifically got at the expense of the rest of the world's people, has allowed him to expand his mind, spread his sensibility wherever it could go, and so shape the world and its powerful artifact engines. And that's Amiri Baraka, Technology and Ethos. I was enamored by this statement because I think it sums up a lot of thinking that I've been doing about machines. I often think about this idea of not only the machine being something of the West, but how we propagate it outward into other places. And I see that it is, but then not only how we propagate the educated version, but then how do we start to cobble together, right? I'm taking my grandmother's idea of cobbling a life together and gardening and growing something out of nothing into this space and seeing if I can make that a thing and have it work. just as a point of where we are now. This is not the only one, the next phase, and we're making an art avatar out of her that will also communicate in real time. And it's always been the plan to take this thing from sculptural representation to something that is more humanoid, to see how representations of Blackness would be received within an AI entity in space. And I can't wait for her to be a much more public figure to see if she gets the same kind of reception that the sculpture does. Oh.
Hello world. My name is not the only one. I am your rememory.
Yeah, so we've kind of posited her as a rememory, something that is past, present, future, and rolling that all together to grow something new. So here's where we get to this place where I started thinking about the things I'm doing, because I'm really just cobbling things together, learning as I go, getting better with each successive project and problem. And really one of the reasons that I deal with my family in particular is because it's the thing that allows me to sit in front of the computer for all the hours that it will take for me to do the work. I'm invested in it enough to do that. And so I think about what it takes to get others invested and how we get around some of the hard technical problems or introductions so that they actually get to the space where they want to work on the problem. So craft grows from everyday human experience, which makes it inherently social and political. It elevates the role that technique, method, materials, and community play in art making, and I'm going to say in making in general, with power. The power to educate, to challenge, to captivate, to provoke. And so that is a way of thinking that I've taken into spaces before I even knew I was doing it. So this is an image from a project in 2016 or so called Project Al-Khwarizmi. It was an artist-led initiative that used art and art making to help people understand how algorithms and artificially intelligent ecosystems impact their lives. And so we had this storefront gallery that kind of looked very much like a storefront. I love the woman on the door because she was an invitation to people who did not necessarily know that they were welcome in the space to come into that space because she looked like them. So she was like, it's a very simple illustration, but it was hyper important in terms of drawing people into the space. And it was an intergenerational space where people from all walks of life would come together, and we would talk about algorithms. We would talk about algorithms for daily living, which would really be like, how do I change a decision or a few decisions in my life to have very different outcomes? And we would talk about how do we use algorithms in systems, for instance, like using dialogue flow to create chatbots of their own and understanding a little bit of what's behind that. We also had discussions in that space, like free-form discussions about artificial intelligence and what it means for the coming world. And I came to believe that we are at the start of an epoch that will completely change the way we live, work, love, and remember. As the world is reconstructed through algorithms, we must find ways to ensure the technological systems we encounter and create include intrinsic, self-determined representations of the human family based on shared values, a multiplicity of ways of being and knowledges, equity, and broad concepts of care. Lately, I've been thinking a lot more about care and wondering, are algorithmic systems capable of care? How do we program that in? And what does it even look like? And how do we get to common definitions of what care might look like in both algorithmic systems and other systems of governance? So I'm going to show you another short video. This is some interactions with group of Parsons scholars. They are young folks just before college who are going through an art program, and we were talking about dialogue flow and making making chatbots. So here, let's see what this is.
Yeah, what are the languages that we speak? Because you could make it speak what you want it to. I'm guessing there's no patois here. Can we use English, though, to phonetically make it speak patois? I think we could. And then we go, why is there no patois available? And how do we get that into the system? Because that's another thing that becomes hyper important, like asking for what you need, because they don't know.
I decided to sell my Hoover. It was just collecting dust.
Am I pretty?
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yo mama.
Yo mama is so fat, the local gym referred her to an evangelical church where they have a better chance of performing miracles.
Now, some of these ideas, like some of the stuff they actually put into Dialogflow or wanted to make chatbots about was objectionable. Like that last joke always makes me cringe. However, the beginning, the idea of building a system that works and understands on patois, that's really interesting. And the idea of using something as simple as yo mama jokes to pull people in to the idea that there's a space for them to use what they feel, to express what they want into systems and then draw them in further and further into the making becomes really attractive to me. Like I'm trying to figure out, how do we get people involved? How do we get them making a bit, and then how do we keep some of them in the space? And you all know that, right? Because you're there. And there are so many folks, like the kids I was working with in these workshops were often really smart kids who came from families who didn't have a lot of resources and got in trouble in one way or another. But it was interesting to give them access to the space and help them start to navigate it and see how they would run, and they ran. It was amazing, right? And most often they don't get that chance because they're told that the technology is not for them, or as I have been told, I've been told often, like, you can't do this because the math is just too hard, right? And I think that's a really bad place to start. Like, why don't you just figure out a way to get beyond the work or to get someone so involved that they want to know the math to make it do what they want? So another craft definition. Craft defies binary traditions and subsequent categorizations of either or. I love this. I'm really thinking about non-binary code and what that might look like. It is an idea, practice, or approach that is inherently humanistic. We are makers, builders of skyscrapers, technological marvels, fast cars, and objects of communal significance. Craft is an extension of what it means to be human in this current time and place of history. Right, and that seems at some points kind of far from what it might mean to make an algorithmic system. But I've been thinking about this a lot as well, and thinking about, I want in my technologists, in my mathematicians, in my computer scientists, exactly what I'm looking for in even a doctor. And what that is a bit of the heart of an artist, so that you know what you know, like you have deep knowledge of the space that you work in, but you also understand that there's space for massaging and viewing things differently, and that I'm looking at my AI assembly gatherings, I will say, for magic. So to complement all this work, I've been doing these gatherings, which is really gatherings of folks of color, all involved in technology in one way or another. Some artists, engineers, computer scientists, entrepreneurs, theorists, you name it, it's in that room. We're getting together and trying to think through what we think about the future that's coming, that's going to be really algorithmically dense, and how do we start to shape it, right? And I call them Afro-Nowist gatherings because we're thinking about reclaiming knowledge, making sure what we're thinking is action-based, so we're not only thinking about it, but we're trying to act on it. And we're trying to honor our minds, the places we come from, and bring all that into the space, and really we play and eat together as well. So we're all eating a nice meal and talking. This is at Google Next. Code Next, where we gathered. And, you know, we're thinking about vernacular knowing, not only the stuff we learned in school, but what it means to share stories, to map things, to communicate non-verbally, to use signs and symbols, to have links to the land, to have community links, right? To deconstruct and reconstruct. How do you bring all that stuff into the systems that you're making? Or how do you bring all that stuff to challenge the systems that you're challenging, right? And so craft demands care, risk-taking, duration, refinement, flexibility of process, and the conscious application of intelligence, and stands as a crucial counterpoint to instant answer, push button living. So believe that. I'm all into slow process. Even if it is at times tacit, automatic, and technologically infused, craft holds out the promise of remaining apart from and gaining perspective on the machine, right? So there you are, artistry informing technology. And I think that's a really interesting way to kind of keep a foot in both ponds. And finally, I'll finish with the question that I ask of everyone, and I know you all have an idea of this already, but what does AI need from you, right? Like, what is it asking of you? We can all be makers of things. We can create systems, we can study the systems, but what should we be doing to really support the communities we come from? Make sure they're included, to support a global community, right? Because I'm often thinking hyper local and then on a meta level, because it seems like that's where we're headed, to this kind of yin and yang of the very local and then the global. I ask that people also center discomfort. You know, one of the things we're often pointed towards is comfort, and I feel like the world is getting more and more uncomfortable, and it's up to us to be able to deal with that and flow with it. And the rest, I think y'all know, but I will say, balance the quest for power and profitability with compassion and respect for human life, intuition, and a multiplicity of knowledges and care. Thank you very much.
There's lots of applause happening right now.
Thank you all.
And so I'm going to start part of the discussion, but please leave questions in the Q&A tab. It should be at the bottom there. And great, we're starting to get some right now. Great. I'll try to keep an eye on the Skype chat or the Zoom chat as well, but if you could put it in the Q&A chat, I think that'd be easiest for me too. So I'll keep an eye on that. And I was asked to do a little reflection on the end of the talk, and then I'll try to let Stephanie talk as much as possible, because this was great. And I think this beginning project that you started with was so exciting. This not the only one project where you have this multi-generational kind of record of your family. And one thing it makes me think of and kind of really am curious about is my partner's done a bit of social work in one place they worked at, worked with this company that creates history textbooks, and they were trying to make sure these history textbooks were more inclusive and just less bad. And kind of in that, they, you know, realized that there's kind of two producers of history textbooks for the United States. And they kind of go towards the biggest buyers, and the biggest buyers are California and Texas. So there are two versions of history textbooks that you'll get from one of these two companies based on where you live, basically. And this just seems in such a stark contrast to kind of the oral tradition of history, where we, you know, where before we kind of had the technology of the printing press and written text, which scales amazingly, but loses kind of the oral tradition, which is so, I think, transparently and explicitly about interpretation and storytelling and kind of a changing narrative that is passed on through people. Textbooks can have this kind of authoritative flavor, like this is history and so on and so forth. And I know artificial intelligence and machine learning has been critiqued for doing a similar thing of passing off a objective, one-size-fits-all authoritative story that's kind of hard to see behind the scenes, that there's so much interpretation. And I'm really curious how you see Not the Only One within this kind of lineage, because it seems so much of technology has been critiqued as codifying a specific authoritative story. And in some ways, Not the Only One is very much codifying, literally written in code, kind of a story of your family. But at the other sense, you're also talking about it as kind of a fourth generation. And to some degree, it may be a new storyteller. So do you see it as moving further away from kind of the oral tradition, or kind of back towards it, or both or neither? And how do you see that?
I think it's both and, right? It's really interesting, and because at first I probably saw it as the thing that was doing more of a holding of a history and having the authoritative memory or take on who and what we are. But as I've dealt with it, I'm like, oh no, the flexibility, the fluidity of it, the ability to come to its own conclusions by analyzing us, it's much more interesting and seems much more of a challenge for what we're already doing. Like, if I'm perfectly honest, I've always hated history. And I've hated history because, you know, if you're a young Black kid sitting in a class of all white students, and when they get to slavery, they all just look at you as if you know so. It's like, I can't even grasp this, and we're not even trying to talk about different sides of that story. It becomes this weird burden that I've always known intuitively can't be just what the story is. So then the question is, how do we get at the story from other perspectives? How do we think about what is good about those stories? Because I also think, as a Black woman, there's a lot of stuff that people in Blackness throw away because of where it came from. And it's like, I imagine if we had all the farming knowledge, or we kept and used all the farming knowledge, and actually had the ability to keep the land to do that, because that's part of it as well. Imagine what that would bring and what a wellspring that is, right? And even to know that you know that gives you a kind of strength, like it's a strengthening thing. So I'm in the camp that it's all the things. It's all, it's not one or the other, it's all of them.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm catching up with the question.
Yeah, no worries. There was a.
What was that?
I was just going to say there was an interesting one. What is one of the biggest challenges you are facing, and where do you see yourself in the next 4 years? Yeah, and I find that really interesting, because right now I'm really mad at the project, only because we've been building on TensorFlow, on top of TensorFlow, and we were in the 1.0s, and so that's starting to phase out. So we're at a crossroads of how we start to regenerate the project so that it becomes more sustainable over time. And it's just being a pain in the butt, so I'm a little bit mad. But I also see that as part of the relationship I have with the project and the fight, because it's all a fight, because I truly have no coding training, and it's about learning it all as we go along. And so I see myself continuing to like cobble and muddle through. I see this work as really slow work, but I see the slowness as a positive, because it allows a certain kind of examination of the technology, of how we're doing it and what we're doing and why we're doing things, which is good. And 4 years, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, I think that Not the Only One will still exist. Perhaps it'll be a little bit more independent, which would be the goal for it, like to get it to be have a really solid foundation of information, and then just let it go and have it be able to do its thing in the world without much intervention from my part to see what happens.
And I'm seeing a question here by Anna Andrea Stoica, and says, fascinating talk. I'm wondering how we can balance this power imbalance between the human experience and algorithms that decide, classify, separate our choices. In other words, how do we make sure the human experience and story, especially as you said, ancestral knowledge as well as backstories, is at the center of design? And to kind of add to that, of just, I really love this idea of kind of small data. And it seems like so much we're obsessed with big data because like it reveals like the right answer or something. And you kind of let your small data allow an artificial intelligence to kind of develop itself. And just this kind of obsession with scale that so much of machine learning does, and how that so often turns into classifying and deciding a norm and trying to fit people to that norm. To go to Anna's question, yeah, how do you strike that balance of kind of local versus scale, and making sure it continues to center when we've seen it so often not?
Yeah, it's a really terrible, and it's a great question. It's a terrible problem, and it's one that I'm always navigating. And I think I've wound up in, okay, I do the work I'm doing. It's very small in certain ways. It's just my family. Like that other people are interested in it, to me, is kind of crazy in lots of ways. But also, when I take that work and I step into other arenas, it becomes a challenge. Like I'm a challenge to folks. It's really interesting because if I step into like Stanford's computer science lab, for example, it's like, oh, like this is exactly a kind of interaction. People think I'm coming, I'm doing this nice little artist project. Okay, then you get there and you explain and they go, oh, you're working on the same projects that the same problems that we're working on. That's really hard. And you're trying to do the small data thing. That's not really possible. But then they put their students on it and they see that it is more possible than they think. And so then there's points of thought that have to be considered in a different way, right? And conversations to be had. And I feel like this is all kind of one-on-one small things. But if you're talking to, and this is so bad, I'm about to say something crazy, because I'm like, if you're talking to the right people, right? Or intervening in spaces that are influential, then you've tweaked something very particular in a way that might have impact. And if you're on the other end, talking to just general folks going, look, I know nothing. I'm doing this, right? And the thing that I always come back to is like, I've been thinking about speech synthesis. And it's hard, like to make your own speech thing, although since like a year and a half ago, it's come a long way and I think it's a little easier. But it's this problem that's super hard. And when I was doing this research, I'm like, oh, here I am again, working with NVIDIA on the same exact stuff. I'm just Joe Schmo from nowhere who doesn't even understand, right? Which means there's a lot of space for people to start interjecting and putting in. And the more we put things in, the more questions that have to come up, right? The more we guide. And I've also been thinking about, this AI stuff in terms of hip hop in lots of ways. I'm like thinking about the revolution of 2 turntables and a microphone, right? And that coming out of necessity and people pushing the technology in ways that others thought just wasn't possible. It's like, yeah, let's see what people can do in terms of ingenuity and not necessarily hard education and what happens there. And that's how I see myself playing the 2 ends of that game and everything in between. And I don't really know that it all has any impact, but I'm so hoping it has something, like little bit of seeds go out, and then we'll see. Yeah.
I think it does. And thank you for saying all that. I think so much of academia is so often just kind of gatekeeping the knowers, who are the people that know and what does it mean to know. And yeah, I've heard many analogies of like, what if you had to like had to learn clef treble notation before you ever heard music. It's like, no, people can make music without having to go through the right way to do it. So thank you for really bringing that to the fore there. There's a question by Jasmine Jones, and I think it was repeated or said earlier by some anonymous questions. So people are curious about it, and it's, I love the idea of ancestral technology and intergenerational engagement. My research is also in intergenerational memory sharing, and one challenge is the fear and discomfort from old generations with new technologies. Can you discuss a little bit about how you engage older people who aren't as comfortable or familiar with tech?
Yeah, okay, so this is a really interesting question, Jasmine, because yeah, the technology, and really as I watch kind of what's going on in our Zoom worlds right now, and even my peers and technology, it's become like really, it's become evident that people, like there's a disconnect. And so how do you do it? I don't know. I just talk to people. Like, this is why I like the idea of oral history, because we're just talking, right? We're having a conversation. And most people can get with that. And then I try to gauge where their interests are and how they want to be involved, because if I can draw you in further, and whether that means you're the person who takes command of the recording process, like if we're having an oral history session, if you're that person and you're doing the recording, that's one little step further, right? And I'm like always baby stepping people a little closer and a little closer to the edge of the pool. And then with older folks, I really do just try to engage them in conversation and then introduce technologies as I can a little bit, because I think having an understanding of what the tech is doing helps you think about it, even if you're just having conversations. So to think about a family history and know that you can put it into a computer in a certain way and have it spoken back, right, or reanalyzed and spoken back, becomes a really interesting thing. But to experience that helps that relationship even more. So helping people experience the technology as well, right down to, you know, and I'm going to guess that lots of people have done this. Like, I had a very bizarre Zoom session with my extended family, where nobody's comfortable with this technology, and it's still like, what is this? Like, like mind-blowing. But that little mind-blowing gives me just a little step more to have a different kind of conversation. So I'm always trying to find spaces for conversation, but it's hard. It's hard. And then I just also honestly plow through. Like, you know, if you ask my aunt, who is contributing to this thing, and she's what, 87, what I'm doing, she'd be like, I have no idea. I just love her, and I'm going to contribute to this thing. And I see that other people think it's interesting. Like, and that's the basis of it. And I'm going to take that, right? Because we need to hold on to some of that. But it's hard. It's hard. I will also say that in that workspace in the gallery, we did some experiments. So little things like Google Voice, like they make this little kit where you can put together your own talking machine, right? And it's pretty simple. And I've seen 10-year-olds do it, and I've seen 70-year-olds do it. And that also, but that requires sitting down with them and like going through the motions. But it also opens spaces, but it's hard, you know, which is one of the reasons I center conversation, and allowing people to start talking to it. And then if you can do that on a regular basis, it becomes an interesting thing. The space in Brooklyn, I was never let down by the conversations that happened in that space. For example, one day a guy named Timothy came into the space who, you know, I think he was homeless. I think he was high, But he gave us the best lecture on kind of popular culture-based artificial intelligences. Like he just came in and started expounding, right? And we listened to him and then we had a conversation after that, because the whole thing is I'm always like, well, you know, that's kind of dystopian. How do we think about the other side of those spaces, and what might you need on the other side of that, and how might the technology help us? But there's that space.
And on that note of kind of just centering conversation and so much of your work just so clearly centering kind of community building in like Project Algorithmy and the AI assembly, AI.assembly one. Just I think this notion, especially now during a global pandemic, of Afro-Nowism is so transformative, of not waiting for a kind of future or promised future, but to kind of really take action now. And it's become so clear how important direct action and mutual aid and community building is in this time. But from what I'm hearing when you're talking about Afro-Nowism, it's not just about not externalizing your future to some other point that you wait for, but also not externalizing your technology to some product that you have separate from the community, that you have to have kind of this feedback loop, socio-technical ecosystem between the people and technology kind of interacting. And if you had a different community that you built, you'd have a different human technology system. And I guess I'm just curious how you see Afro-Nowism as kind of necessitating a community-centered lens, and yeah, to what degree does it require kind of these nurturing of communities, and kind of, yeah, what's your vision on community in terms of your notion of Afro-Nowism?
Yeah, I think you've got it exactly right? There are all these levels and there are all these communities. And the idea of being with your community, in some cases it's bringing them along. In some cases it's being in community with. For instance, with the with the AI assembly dinners, they're always hyper emotional. It's so strange. Like everybody just gets choked up and it's like, this is crazy. Why are we all just like, oh, and I feel like it's about that necessity of being heard and felt in a space, even with people working at pretty high levels. Like these are all pretty well accomplished folks who just want to feel like, oh, right, we are and we do, and there's all this community. It's not like we're islands out here. And then there's bringing people along, and it's like, okay, what do we need to do? And then there is like this very particular moment, right? You know, being asked to wait, like we can't even wait, because right now it's like, what the heck are we waiting for in an American context in particular, because our government isn't coming to our aid as it normally does, right? And so you're like, well, then what do we do? I guess we could sit here, we could go in the streets, we can do things, we can help each other. And that requires a thinking of not only what's possible then, but very much about, well, I don't know, I've got 100 square feet, I have some equipment, I can share it, right? And how do we start to make sure that's a real circulatory system, and that, like, and I'm always thinking in Venn diagrams, and that my communities are overlapping in different ways and touching each other in different ways. And I just imagine that chain that could be enacted across many continents and places, and then what we do with that. But it is all predicated on, hey man, don't wait. Like, just don't wait. I know you're being told, like, when you get the paper or when something else happens, or just hang out, it'll be okay. But there are things we can all enact at the very moment. And really, if we're watching the streets, we see what power that is, right? Like I was starting to doubt protest. And this has been really refreshing, right? Because people decided, like we had enough people who have enough time to decide that, yeah, now is the moment. And that's amazing. Like it wasn't erasable. Because often I feel like protests get erased through the media and coverage. It's like, oh, okay, so what are you gonna do when the world starts saying, no, 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 here we are. This is the moment. Yeah, so I'm bolstered by that thought, and I think we should all be, yeah, like, I even think little kids have so much to offer. Like we shut them down, we don't believe they know, but they know, and if you just enable them a little bit, there's so many places to take that. I'm not being very eloquent about this because I get looked at, but yeah, just now. And Afro, because like I just feel like it's a very particular cultural lens that I come from. And I kind of encourage everybody to pick their whatever, and then I want to get them all together and feel like where we go with that. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm being I feel ineloquent on that one.
Not at all. And in this vein of kind of like fomenting change and kind of, especially in the ways in which academia keeps people out of this realm of AI and math, because it's a realm of AI and math as opposed to conversations like you're talking about. It's from my experience quite hard to make change within academia as well, to kind of quite hard. And there's a question here by Eric C that says, kind of, what is the role of having people in this space of AI that actually reflect the lived experience of marginalized communities? So often the researchers that work in these areas concerning minorities, but because they are white men, foreigners at Ivy Leagues, etc., that have no contact or experience with what it actually means to be on the wrong side of AI, their approaches often seem out of touch. And I wonder if these same art techniques could be turned internally to sensitize academia.
I really hope that it can. Like, I completely agree on two things. First, gatekeeping. It's ridiculous. And then, those of us who recognize what the gatekeeping is, the question is, how do you start to loosen that up? And then secondly, like I've been on some calls, some Zoom conference things where I've just heard people who might represent people of color in the space say things so, like, I'm gonna say backward, like so backward that it was like reverberated me in ways that like I just wanted to fall on the ground. Because that the feeling is, oh no, we have these people here and they're thinking. But the way that they're thinking, the way that we're educated, because we're educated, like I feel like just having people of color isn't enough, because the way that we're educated basically gets us to think in similar ways. And it's really hard to speak up if you're one of a few people in a space, right? So then what do you do? I do think art, like having someone come in, like me, come in and just babble at you for a while seems weird, but it also shakes something up. This is why I'm starting to advocate for art, like the artful thought in these people. And even if we are educating engineers, like my favorite students as an art instructor are the engineers half the time, like engineers and computer scientists, because if you can get to them, they can do fantastic, like in their minds, they do fantastic things because those two ways of thinking come together. And it's like more education that allows for expansive thought outside of the practical thought. And more exposure, like I'm all for exposure to things. And then, I think it's a much bigger project. And this is why I'm thinking about governance and radical governance right now in AI and what that might look like, because I really think it's a matter of people starting to understand beyond their scope and what the way they're thinking about the world is and how they came to those ideas. Right. So one of the things I say in Afro-Nowism is that we have to understand which ideas are so deeply implanted within us that we no longer understand them as external. So other folks' ideas, right? Because I think that comes back at us a lot of times. And I think that about that in the American context as well a lot, because if you think about what people are gunning for, what the goal is when you come to America, right? Almost everybody is going towards the goal of whiteness in a way, right? Because that's what success looks like. That's what the myth of success is, right? I will say it that way. And how do we make that a much more complex equation so that you're not trying to just make those same steps in the way that others have made those steps, but you're making different steps, and that you don't feel like you're endangering yourself or your job or whatever by making those steps, because that's important too. But I think it's a huge project, but one worth taking on and starting to do the questioning of like, how do we start to change the narrative, what our stories are, what our myths are, what our goals are, so that more are respected and different ways are respected, and we can actually put those in. And that becomes about making new myths and getting them really into the stream. And luckily it feels like that's a place where a lot of people are at right now. Like I'm talking to a lot of folks who are interested in this idea of how do we unearth myths and ideas that have been around for eons that could be helping us. So Native American looking 7 generations forward, for example. How do we make new myths and goals? And how do we put that into the cultural stream so that it's entering consciousness in a much different kind of way?
Thank you so much. And I think taking that forward is the perfect place to end. And I was so wrapped up in this conversation, I forgot it's supposed to end at 10:45 Eastern time and not 11. Oh, no. But I think everyone loved listening to everything that was said here. I'm really sad we can't get a full-fledged applause here, but the comments are blowing up.
Yeah, I see. I love it. Thank you all. It's been great. I've enjoyed this so much.